Hello students and welcome to another video. I'm your teacher Mr. Flynn, and today we're going to be talking about cellular respiration. Now, just like we talked about in the previous video with photosynthesis, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of steps, things you have to kind of remember. Cellular respiration is the same way, all right? And instead of having it in 2 steps, we now have 3 steps, all right? So as we go through this, just recognize we have things in here that are helping the process move along, and then there's like major kind of key things that you need to just be able to differentiate from one another. And the 3 big parts to this is glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. So these are the 3 main steps. But overall, with our equation, cellular respiration encompasses all 3 of these steps. Okay? So let's take this like one kind of step at a time. So right here, we have glycolysis. That's step 1. So glycolysis, what it does is it happens outside the mitochondria. This happens in the cytoplasm of the cell. Okay? And what glycolysis does is it breaks the sugar molecule down so that it's in a usable form. And that usable form is called pyruvate. It's not in your notes, and I don't expect you to go into that much depth, but I need you to know that it prepares glucose and it breaks it into 2. It breaks it into smaller pieces that are a little more manageable. You can kind of think of it like when you swallow food and it goes down into your stomach, you chew it before you swallow, right? You want to break that food down a little bit to make it easier for digestion. That's what's going on here. The glycolysis is breaking apart your glucose so that it's a little more chewable when it gets inside of the mitochondria, all right? So that's what I'm trying to emphasize here is glycolysis is about providing and preparing the way. Now, in that process, okay, it creates something called NADH. Okay, you may recognize this. This is similar to what you saw in the previous video about photosynthesis. It is an electron carrier, okay, and what it does is it carries electrons to help power the electron transport chain. Okay, so it creates some of these carriers to help with processes later on. So it's basically preparing the glucose, making them smaller for the Krebs cycle, and it's at the same time creating carriers that are going to be used later on. And then ultimately, you create 2 ATP, okay? Cellular respiration's purpose is to create as much energy as possible. And if you look down below, you're going to notice something. We have 2 ATP, 2 ATP, and then 34 ATP. Where is most of the energy being created? It is happening inside of the electron transport chain. Glycolysis and the Krebs cycle are ways of preparing electron carriers to get it prepared so when the electron transport chain does its process, it can create the most amount of energy as possible, and it can be as efficient as possible. Okay? So let me erase some of this. I'm starting to clutter it up again. This is going to be me going through this several times with you. All right. So we have our 3 processes. All right, I just cleared it up again. So we just talked about glycolysis and its purpose is to break it up. Okay, the next part is the Krebs cycle. Okay, the purpose of the Krebs cycle is to create more of the same, right? We created some NADH. Now we're going to create more of that, and we'll even create some FADH2. So these are both electron carriers. Read this note right here. I'm going to circle it again. This note right here says these are electron carriers, and they are used in the electron transport chain. We need them so when we get to the electron transport chain, we can create a maximum amount of energy. So what we're doing is we're chewing our food, and then now it's in our stomach in the Krebs cycle. You can kind of think of the stomach, Krebs cycle, stomach. You see how it's turning around? It's being churned inside your stomach, and your body is digesting it even more, all in preparation of an electron transport chain. This is where everything happens. Okay, it's where all the energy is created. Very little energy is created in the Krebs cycle, but we do have CO2 that's created. So the CO2 that you breathe out as part of respiration, the respiration part, of cellular respiration, is CO2. And it also creates a very small amount of energy, so 2 ATP. So basically chewing our food and then using our stomach, right, as our example, right, we now have basically broken down the sugar to a point where we can actually utilize its parts. All right, and in that process, we created a little bit of energy, but not very much. All right, and if we notice up above, okay, the Krebs cycle, right, it's releasing that CO2, And glycolysis is going into cellular respiration, and it's being broken down. Okay, it's being broken into smaller pieces. And then some of that carbon is then released in the Krebs cycle as CO2. All right. Okay, let's clear this up again, and let's talk about the electron transport chain. We're getting there. We're making it happen. Let me tap this. There we go. All right. So now let's focus on the very last part. So we've got our NADH that's being created from the chewing and the digestion in our stomach. That example, the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, they are now being utilized in the electron transport chain. And then we introduce oxygen. So this is where the breathing comes in. When you breathe in oxygen, it goes into your mitochondria with the help of all of these electron carriers. And in a process called the electron transport chain, we create water, because the oxygen's coming in to accept these hydrogens. You see these hydrogens here? We have 1, 2 hydrogens, 4 hydrogens here, and then we accept some oxygen here, and now we can create water. Right? That's actually the byproduct of the electron transport chain, is just a small amount of water. Okay, it's pretty insignificant. That's why you still have to drink water. All right, as a person, you have to drink water. It's not enough to get it from electron transport chain. But during that process, we create and generate 34 ATP. All right, it's where we create the most amount of energy. And that right here happens at the end of our equation. All right, so let's go through and look at this in terms of the equation rather than in terms of just looking at this picture. So we have oxygen. We breathe it in, and we eat sugar. So we eat our sugars, and then we breathe. Okay, and we get that oxygen through our breath, breathing, and then eating, we get glucose. And then glycolysis happens, and we break that glucose down into a more usable function. And then the Krebs cycle is where we release the CO2. And then the electron transport chain is where we release the water. And then those go back eventually to a plant, and they can do photosynthesis with it. And then the ultimate part is where we create our energy. Okay? And then these parts here get recycled. All right, and then they go back to being sugars, et cetera. And so you should understand that by now, because we've done several videos, and this is the final one in that series. All right? So overall, okay, you have to understand the 3 parts: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. Glycolysis and the Krebs cycle together are made to create the conditions for the electron transport chain to perform at its optimum, which is creating NADH and FADH2. All right, and in that process, they create just a little bit of energy, and they release some byproduct, which is carbon dioxide. All right, so hopefully, okay, by the time you've heard me kind of roll over this several times in different ways, you're starting to get a big idea of this picture. And yes, just like photosynthesis, I need you to take some time and to go through this and try to map it out on your own. And try not to use your notes to see how much you can remember in all these parts. Everything on this picture is free game for your test. I will ask you questions like, what is the product of the electron transport chain? And you're going to say water and 34 ATP. Or if I ask the question, what's the main purpose of glycolysis? One thing you can say is, well, to break glucose down, create an electron carrier, and to create a small amount of energy, right? You're going to need to be able to navigate this image and understand kind of what's happening, all right? If you have any questions, please come talk to me, and we can work through this, right? The second part to this is called respiration. Now, there's 2 types of respiration. We have aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, and we're not going to get into like the nitty-gritty about like just like we did up here in this image, okay? This image is talking about aerobic respiration, and aerobic respiration refers to the use of oxygen, okay? Anaerobic respiration says no oxygen, so they are different from each other, okay? And you can think of it like sprinters versus marathon runners, okay? Aerobic respiration, you're running slowly, slow enough that you can breathe in oxygen. So this is like walking or jogging. And then anaerobic respiration is like running, where you're running so fast that you can't breathe enough oxygen to keep that supply of energy available. And so that's why when you run and sprint, you get exhausted. Like if you see people that run the 100, 200, 400 meter races in track events, you'll see that they get exhausted by the time they hit the end of their race. While the mile kids or the 2-mile kids, they're running 8 laps instead of half or part of a lap. Okay, they can run the whole time, and when they get done, they're pretty tired. But if you ask them, they could probably still keep going because they're going slow enough that it's still considered aerobic, where they're using oxygen. And the anaerobic respiration, they get their energy from their stored cells, and once they run out, they can't replenish it fast enough. Okay, so in aerobic respiration, you use oxygen. It yields a high amount of ATP. It's very efficient, and it's sustainable, meaning that you can do it for a long period of time. While anaerobic respiration is a low-yielding ATP, okay, it depletes very quickly, it's not efficient, and its example is like running or sprinting, like there at the bottom there, okay? So we just need to understand, when we have oxygen, our mitochondria function very efficiently, and we create tons of energy. When there's no oxygen, our body goes into another state, okay? And another state that is also referred to anaerobic respiration is a thing called fermentation. We won't go into that kind of detail for this class, but fermentation uses a very similar process, like when we're making breads or making wines, those kind of things. If you're interested and want to know more about how that's made, well, anaerobic respiration is where you need to focus, okay? But as far as this class, all I want you to do is to tell me the differences between them, okay, with or without oxygen, and how our body goes about using energy, okay? All right, if you have any questions, please come talk with me. If not, until next time, thanks for watching.